Welcome to the 82nd episode of the New Ventures podcast. I am your host, Sanyal, the founder of Regain Paradise, a boutique climate finance firm and a visiting fellow at the Cambridge Judge Business School. In my continuing series on understanding the links between climate change and food security, today we take a deep dive into understanding the Suchana program, a 6-year-long nutritional program that aimed to reduce stunting cases among children under the age of 2 in 2 districts of Bangladesh. To do that, we have 2 guests again, Sheikh Shahed Rahman, who was the chief of party, which actually means the head of implementation of the Suchana program, on behalf of Save the Children, an international non-government organization which works for children. And Rubaiyath Sarwar, who is the managing director of Innovation Consulting, a management consulting firm focused in the development sector. Welcome, Dr. Shahed and Rubaiyath.
Hi, Sanjoy.
Hi, Sanjoy. Thanks for adding me into this discussion.
To start off, maybe I'll ask Dr. Shahed you to first introduce yourself to our audience.
I'm Dr. Sheikh Shahed Rahman, working in the public health sector for the last 18 years, mostly in the food security and nutrition program in Bangladesh. I had an opportunity to work in the Suchana program as a chief of party since 2018.
And Rubaiyath, maybe a little introduction about yourself.
Thank you, Sanjoy. I'm Rubaiyath Sarwar, managing director and lead consultant at Innovision. I'm an economist, but I also have degrees in business administration. I've been working consultant in international development on systems change for last 2 decades, pretty much around the world, but heavily focused in Bangladesh, around Southeast Asia, West Africa, East Africa, MENA, and Southern Africa.
And Dr. Shahed, it would be lovely to know a little bit more about yourself, your background, to what you did before Save the Children.
Actually, I was working in the public health. I started my career in the Pathfinder, specifically on the government service delivery component. And then it has an opportunity to work with the Food Security and Nutrition Program funded by USAID and FCDR in European Union. So my whole career has been invested to learn about the food security and nutrition with the climate change component. I had a medical background. I have been graduated in medicine, and then I had a public health degree from Rollins School of Public Health, and then working in Bangladesh and part of Ghana and Sudan. So that was a brief introduction about myself.
Yes, very interesting, actually. And Rubaiyath, how did you get involved in the Suchana project?
We got involved as a professional service provider through tender process, competitive process, when Suchana was looking for consultants to undertake their semi-annual surveys. And then we did 2 rounds of surveys for them. We also did 2 more studies. One was looking at how Suchana was engaging different market actors to deliver the nutrition-sensitive interventions. And also, we worked with Suchana later on a scale program, which they called a replication program, where they looked at 8 different practices and they scaled it through different government agencies. We reviewed the interventions and explained to Suchana how those were bringing about more systemic changes and what needs to be done in the future.
Let's go in and talk about the project in detail. Dr. Shahed, obviously, I'm going to start with you. Tell us a little bit about the project objectives. And when you came in to Save the Children, was the project already defined? Just tell us those early days.
The early days, there are some operationalizing a large program like Suchana. The extent and the breadth and width of the program is huge. It was a 49.3 million British pound sterling program, and there were 8 partners and 1 research partner. ICDRB, Save the Children, was the management agency, and there was 3 large international NGOs and the 3 local NGOs, Helen Keller International, then World Fish and International Development Enterprise. Those are the partners we have to work with. So initial 2015 to 16, there was some struggle and challenge to roll out. And I would really refer to the program design here. The understanding about the program design, the step towards design program, a randomized control program has been introduced in Bangladesh to understand the reason why stunting is not really reducing over the period with the multiple programs in country. And the inquisitiveness of the donor, I would really appreciate them because they were willing to invest an expensive program in the northeastern part of Bangladesh, where the highest rate of stunting across Bangladesh, to understand the reason. For this, with a large size, huge consortium, and there was a target of 4 cohort of population to be included into the program. So it was a challenging situation. And with the management part, Save the Children had some struggle as well in the initial part. And then from mid 2017, it has been gradually stabilized. I joined 1st January 2018. I have seen the initial struggle, but then it was coming to an end. And over the period, I would say Suchana had some struggle with the COVID and the large scale of floods in Bangladesh. And that part geographically is really vulnerable.
So that makes me curious to ask you, Dr. Shahed, who funded the project? I mean, you had so many partners and it was a significant funding, right?
Yeah, significant funding. I mean, the major funding came out from European Union and FCDO. Both of them, they funded the program for the 6 years.
My question to both of you would be, and Rubaiyath, you have worked in this field for a long time. Why was in these two districts stunting among children a problem? As you and me have been discussing, it's not always about poverty.
The causes of stunting has multiple dimensions. You might consider the biological cause, you might consider some social cause, you might consider some behavioral cause. The reason why the high rate of stunting in Sylhet, there was some assumption and some study findings that the biological causes are highlighted, the maternal stature and then education level, and then obviously access to health and nutrition services. And most interestingly, the first childbearing age in Sylhet is much higher than any comparison to any other district. Like Sylhet, compared with the southern district Khulna, the early marriage rate is highest in Khulna, but first child born in Sylhet is a little bit well ahead of time. And then that has a significant impact on the intrauterine growth retardation. And that causes some degree of stunting. And the behavioral cause, obviously, but we found with the initial scoping study and the baseline that there is a huge social inequality there. Climate change effect is there. Poverty, obviously, because in Sylhet, there is a huge rich population. And at the same time, in the bottom, there is a huge poor population. And the population mostly are migrated from other districts to that part of Bangladesh. So the societal cause should be there, social cause. And behavioral cause, mostly there is the very poor access to diet services from the government service mostly, and obviously the household wealth, asset and income.
No, I think I totally agree with your observations. I just probably want to add one more point. There's also a cultural issue probably there. When you talk about the early marriage, early childbearing, that's cultural. So in my different assessments, I've often seen in Sylhet, you also have, say for instance, Sunamganj, it's not one of the poorest regions in the country, but it does have very poor sanitation status. So some of the effects in that region, I find, is also a bit behavioral and cultural, like you were pointing out, Sheikh.
So to many of our audience may not be familiar with the map of Bangladesh, the project was implemented in two districts, what Dr. Shahed and Rubaiyath are talking about, which is on the northeastern part of the country, which is Sylhet is actually a tea growing area of Bangladesh, very beautiful in case you want to visit. And Maulavi Bazar, which is actually just below Sylhet, is used to be part of Sylhet, I think, at some point. Again, on the east and just south of Sylhet. Dr. Shahed and Rubaiyath, I think it'll be interesting to understand, because we know all that women have children early, that often leads the children being stunted. But the social inequality part, that couldn't quite understand. Why do you think, Dr. Shahed, that played a very important role, the area?
As you know, Suchana program, the target population was the poor and extreme poor, the bottom quintile of the population. When we worked with them from the studies that has given the information that the social inequality is there, and not only from Suchana study report, but also from other national reports. And it was very interesting that Sylhet is considered as one of the rich region in Bangladesh, because mostly the people they are staying in, each of the family has a representative in either London or US or Middle East, and the foreign currency they are earning, and they have a luxurious life. But why the stunting is too high?
I've got to interrupt you and say that in Cambridge, the best Indian restaurant is run by a Bangladeshi person from Sylhet.
Yes, so far I know.
So you were saying that it is a rich place, but there is inequality, and that has some linkage with stunting.
Yes, that has an indirect link. If that social inequality has an impact on the sustained poverty, accessing to the services, and also it has a social cause. I mean, how to really get into the social movement, I mean, participation in different platform or getting the services or their entitlement. I mean, that has a huge issues on there. Rubaiyath can cite some examples about accessing the service and difficulties, because he was engaged in multiple, I mean, almost 3-4 studies in Suchana program.
So there's, of course, the income part, and also, like Shahed was explaining, education, income, awareness, all of these play a role in ensuring these households are aware, are informed, and they're taking the right actions to improve their conditions. First and foremost, this is anecdotal, but if you go to the region, you will see that there are many youth who are just sitting idly on the roadside. And if you ask them, aren't you going to college? They will say, no, we are not. Then you ask them, what are you waiting for? I'm waiting to go to London. So like Shahed said, so there's a strong connection when that is an advantage for the region, that is bringing money, but not all of them are succeeding, like the one that you're explaining, who has a huge restaurant in Cambridge and one of the most successful ones. Whole region is a very, very unique feature in terms of economic participation. Also, bear in mind the tea state, so that also explains the inequality. So the tea states, the tea workers, they're very, very poorly paid. There's huge, let's say, concern movement around that. They're minority people. They're not paid well, they live within the community. All of these together creates a huge inequality in that region. And then people, as we are explaining, they don't really have the right kind of behavioral mindsets to access those services and to avail them of the proper food.
Okay, I think I understand the context of the problem, at least to a certain extent. We'll move on to understanding the design of the project. And I think Dr. Shahed already mentioned that it was quite interesting. So maybe I'll start with you, Dr. Shahed. Tell us a little bit about the project design.
It has a very formal program design, a randomized control trial, step-based design that has been possible to design because of, as I mentioned, I mean, we should be thankful to donor, FCD and European Union. Now, there was a 4 cohort of population that has been planned to operate, and each of the cohort will have a separate population group with an intervention period of 36 months. And these 36 months, all the population of those unions will be exposed to the program, the full set of program interventions, which are the nutrition sensitive and nutrition specific interventions. While they designed the program, the initial part, I mean, the cohort 1 and the cohort 4, I mean, typically there was a very poor evidence in Bangladesh that the stunting reduction, why, what are the reasons behind. And when I'm talking about this program design, that is in 2013 to 2014. To Save the Children has a program implemented in southern part, and from there they designed this program and proposed to FCDO. The evaluation design also been placed together. This stepwise design has the opportunity to run this randomized control trial, and the cohort 1 has been intervention and cohort 4 has been taken into as a control group. So the initial first 3 years has been considered as the learning phase of the program. I mean, from this baseline, first cohort end line will typically inform the rest of the 3 cohorts to implement with the learning and accommodating the changes with the interventions. So that was the basic thing. And one thing I should really mention here, that this is a set of interventions has been packaged, designed, and delivered as a package to the population, specifically for the poor and extreme poor. There was no way to really separate out the impact of the interventions, to estimate the impact of a single intervention in this design.
So basically what you're saying is that the project was, the real implementation was over 4 years with 4 cohorts of population. And the project started with one group of population. And because the interventions or the things that you prescribed to the latter group was not started at the same time, that automatically acted as a control group. So we've understood how it has been done in 4 groups. Now we have to understand what has been done, and that's what you call interventions, right? And so tell us a little bit about the interventions that you did.
Interventions, as I mentioned earlier, that the way the program has been designed, there is a package of interventions that has been delivered to the targeted population or the poor and extreme poor we worked with. And that includes the homestead food production component. This has a wide range of skill transfer component and the asset transfer component. At the same time, we worked with the service delivery component within the government, like Ministry of Health and Family Welfare, Social Welfare, Ministry of Agriculture, Fisheries, Livestock, Ministry of Disaster Resilience, Department of Disaster Resilience, all those. And at the same time, we invested a lot on the behavior change component, which not only includes the food consumption behavior or the feeding behavior of the young children, but at the same time, adolescent and the women, that is pregnant and lactating women. And that has a huge impact on their behavior over the period. And at the same time, we formed a group in the community. We call the savings group, the Village Savings and Loan Association, VSLAs. We dedicated our time to really work with the women to stimulate the behavior of savings. Very small amount, almost 80% of the program participants, they were included into this intervention. Over to Rubaiyath for some adding on other aspect of that.
As Dr. Shahed said, Suchana did work on some very small scale, with very small scale households. And as we started to say, it's a nutrition program. So when we say homestead gardening, what we basically mean is that a poor household, it has a backyard or a front yard. And so it undertakes a small scale vegetable garden, primarily to produce the vegetable that it can consume at the household level. But if it has surplus production, it can also sell locally. Suchana continued to work on that, not only on homestead gardening, but also a great value addition of Suchana was also to promote fish production in a small pond. In Bangladesh, most of these poor households, they usually have a small pond that is excavated when they create a new house. But in most of the cases, they became derelict over the period. So Suchana introduced some of the small indigenous species in these ponds with the idea that this household can consume these small indigenous species at the household level, which is a great source of nutrition for the household members, especially the children and also the pregnant and lactating mother. So so the homestead gardening, the small scale of fish production. So these are very important parts. And then why poultry? Poultry as well has this component of supporting the households to have protein intake, but also to gradually expand their income sources, diversify their income sources, and that also is then taken over by the livestock intervention. So these are all small scale, primarily targeted towards household consumption first, but then secondarily to increase the household's income. So, and diversify it so that in the 36 months of intervention, gradually the household is able to generate enough income from which they can continue to sustain their food consumption. So that's the core idea.
It is absolutely interesting that you're talking about small indigenous species, because like every Bengali grandmother tells her daughter who is having the first children that having a small fish from a pond is far more nutritious, right, than the more expensive fish that you can buy from the market. Is that the type of indigenous species that you introduced?
Yes, there's small indigenous fish, the mola, which has been highly recommended for the young children for their brain growth. So that has been introduced in the program by our partner, Goldfish, along with the Ministry of Fisheries and Livestock. But at the same time, what we actually promoted in the program, that any homegrown food that has been introduced, like either fish or small livestock like chicken or duck, or there are some income generation opportunities, skill transfer has been done by the program based on the choice of a population. It has not been very much prescriptive from the program, but the way the program participants, they are willing to work on.
So now that we understand the type of interventions that Suchana was intervening, as I'm speaking about Suchana promoting aquaculture, small indigenous species, or Suchana promoting poultry, an informed audience might be wondering, so what happens? Suchana is giving all of these resources and skills and etc. So what about these households sustaining this on their own? How do they scale it? How does it reach out to more households? So those are the questions that would definitely come up. So this is where Suchana, quite an interesting strategic intervention, not only through government, but also through private sector and the market actors that it involves. So Suchana works on one side with micro, meso, and macro level private sector. And in collaboration with that, Suchana also had the district and the upazila level government offices and even the union level government offices working together. So each of these households, they have access to the services, the resources and inputs that they would require to continue to engage in their production productively. And also, as Dr. Shahed emphasized on, the idea is not only about households producing just enough to consume in their household level, but it's also about households producing enough and then they have sustained consumption in their household. So a poultry household, in that case, they would require vaccination services. So Suchana promoted paravets who were providing the vaccination services. It was promoting vaccinators for that purpose. And then as you'll understand that homestead gardening, it would require some extension services. So Suchana engaged the Department of Agriculture Extension and its extension officers to provide the support. But then again, coming back to the private sector, so when we're talking about these small paravets and the local business service providers and etc., so how do they get their technical support or services and information and resources? So there, Suchana involved the national private sector actors who were then training all of these paravets and LPS and vaccinators and so on and so forth. So eventually what happened, as we also found out in our assessments and the studies that we undertook for Suchana, is that these national private companies, they embedded these local service providers in their own distribution and their end market strategy to reach out to the farmers. So that's a systems change that Suchana achieved.
Involvement of the private sector, that is of course an important part for the sustainability of these projects. But I think I want to understand a little bit more clearly how that was done. So, and I'll pick an example that you gave about the paravet. Is the paravet a private person or is he employed by the government? I suppose he's trained by a government organization. When you talked about a national level private organization, what are these? Help us understand this private sector intervention in more detail?
To understand the Suchana's private sector interventions, let us first try to understand that there are three different levels. There are micro level. What we mean by micro level is the households. And then we have the meso level. What we mean it's the meso level are the vaccinators and the paravets. Now, when I talk about local business advisors, sales agents, vaccinators, paravets, or fisher folks, which are locally called as patilwalas, these are individuals, these are youth, men and women who are employed, who are primarily self-employed, right? So they're not engaged by private sector, they're not government agents, nothing. They're individual youths from the locality who are trained to undertake certain services. So a vaccinator provides vaccine. Paravets provide a different kind of veterinary services. It's called a paravet because it's not a veterinary doctor. They just can undertake some small scale services at the grassroots level. And then when we talk about macro level, we are talking about national private sector. So a seed company, a feed company, I'm talking about pharmaceuticals company in animal health. So these are the macro level private sector. What happened in Suchana is that it trained an army of all of these sales agents. So for example, 450 sales agents, which were primarily women, were trained to supply input materials to beneficiaries. These 450 sales agents, they were supplying inputs. Now, where are these inputs coming from? These were coming from the national private sector, which I say as macro level actors. And then Suchana trained 185 local business advisors from different Suchana staff and NGOs and the local service providers. And then it also created the capacity of the paravets and vaccinators and input retailers. So reaching out to the households better with the services. So these were done by a band of national private sector companies. For example, Renata, which is one of the largest national animal pharmaceutical companies, but also the largest companies in Bangladesh. And then Opsonin Pharmaceuticals, Lal Tir Seed, Metal Agro. So these are the national private sector actors which were then training and supporting these local level individual service providers that I called as paravets, vaccinators, fisher folks, and so on and so forth. But the Department of Agriculture Extension, Department of Livestock, they have their own projects. They also have the mandates to train such individuals in their locality. And they also are having extension agents at the grassroots level to support the households. But they don't essentially have a lot of human resources to reach out to all the households. What Suchana also did, therefore, is connect these private youth service provider with DLS and DAE, which were engaging them in their own projects. So in a way, Suchana was also therefore building the capacity of the government to expand its service network to the extreme poor households, which were in this case the Suchana households. I hope it explains the Suchana's engagement with different types of private sector.
It does. It's very interesting. And to me, while I'm listening to you, Rubaiyath, I'm thinking, the pharmaceutical company and the examples that you gave, and they are essentially doing it because it is in their business interest. They can now sell more products to markets they never could address earlier.
Absolutely. And those are the signs of impact that we observed in our study. We clearly saw that the sales agents and the local business advisors were having very strong connection with the private sector input retailers. They were getting discounted inputs and they were selling it to the grassroots. We also saw some of the paravets being engaged by Department of Livestock. There were clear signs they were being engaged, even the fisher folks, the patilwalas, they were engaged in government projects. We also saw Suchana promoting vermicompost, which is kind of a compost production from vermin. And so the vermicompost producers, they started to engage and involve more farmers in production of vermicompost because there was increasing demand for that. So that's exactly how systems change starts to take place.
Of our audience who do not know what a vermicompost is, it is the composting of organic material using worms. So, Dr. Shahed, I'll go back to you, and I'm going to pick up on that word that you talked about, skills, right? in the context of the way Rubaiyath said it very clearly, there is these households which are the micro, and then there are the meso, which is the self-employed individuals, the fisher person, the paravet. To whom did you scale? I suspect to all of them, right?
We did it on a scaled fashion. Initially, we had established the relationship ministry that we worked with, and namely Fisheries Livestock, Ministry of Agriculture, and then Department of Social Welfare altogether. The target population was our program participant, obviously at the household level. We organized this training to promote and support the production component for the food production specifically, like poultry rearing, like for income generation, any handicraft design, whatever they are doing, or local level small entrepreneurship that they want to do. And that is skill transfer with very specific job nature, what it demands for. And at the same time, what Rubaiyath said, that the business training, and that has included the local entrepreneurs, that is the meso level. And at the same time, we have established the relationship with the major private sectors, and they have their agents that are working in the communities and the rural level that supports the small entrepreneurship that has been promoted through the program.
Now, we've understood homestead agriculture, we've understood training, we've understood sort of the market interventions, but obviously nothing really matters unless the behavior of the individual pregnant woman and the young mother changes, right? Now, that is not easy. Help us understand how you did it.
This is the most critical part of the program. The program has conducted few studies like the formative research, barrier analysis, a very initial part of the program to understand what are the major socio-cultural factors that really refrain them to adopt behavior which is very much beneficial for them. Because of every mother wants their children healthy, happy, playful, right? So it's not something that we are training, we are giving some knowledge to them that is very much unique, but they know. But the behavior change communication component has targeted the whole community with a specific audiences, those who will be initial primary targets, like the family members who will really essentially help the mothers with the children or adolescent or even the pregnant mother. And then the other layers of the society, I mean, the religious leader, service providers, private sector, I mean, the government extension agents, those are the people that we also worked with. And as I refer to the social behavior change communication strategy of Suchana has been defined to integrate with all those nutrition, I mean, all those interventions together. For an example, like a household who is entitled to get a social protection support, so the social behavior change component has been devised to support her how to utilize that component to improve their consumption pattern or how to invest into their families, into the young children. At the same time, this has a very strong niche to improve the food consumption behavior of the both mother and children and young adolescent girls. So I will stop here and ask Rubaiyath to give some example that has been evident from other studies of Suchana he was engaged to.
Perfect.
As you know, Sanjay, one of the critical aspects of Suchana's interventions was about gender inclusivity. And in Bangladesh, a major issue related to gender is that the women, they don't have household decision-making power. And even when they have income, they don't control the income. They give it to their husbands or their mother-in-laws, and they're not having control on their expenditure and meet their needs. So that's a behavior that Suchana definitely wanted to address. And what we saw very interestingly in 2 rounds of surveys is that for each cohort, it was the project very quickly could increase, let's say, the percentage of households who were reporting where women were making decisions to around 60% to 70%. That growth was fast and rapid. But then across the cohorts, we started to see that Beyond that, it was not possible to push it further. So that was very interesting finding for me as a researcher on this, because what I could relate to with my other research is that even though we feel like we can change everyone, that's almost an impossibility. And that's exactly what we were seeing in Suchana program, that after we have reached the threshold of around 60% of 70% households where women are reporting that they now have active decision making due to the project interventions, after that, it becomes very hard to change. And that requires probably very different kinds of interventions. And also the Pareto principle probably comes to play here. How much resources the project really can invest to further change those behaviors.
But this itself is very interesting. What led to the rapid increase from whatever baseline percentage you had to 60% of households where women are taking active decisions? What was the behavior change story behind that?
That across projects, we see a very rapid expansion. So usually the baseline is around one third of the household, 30%, 35%, depending on the area. That's what we see the baselines are. But then rapidly we see a growth, and that growth happens primarily because the projects, they initiate discussion, social discussion. They mobilize community people. And then in that social discussion, people come together, the husbands and wives, they come together, they jointly participate. And we often have seen that women are better managers of finances at their house. So due to that project-led intervention, we start to see that the husband and wife, they have better understanding on their roles in the house, and the husbands start to trust them, and the kind of discussion that starts with the project intervention that leads to a sustained kind of a social behavioral change. But as I was saying, it kind of reaches a maturity level at one point, and those kind of interventions do not work afterwards. And if you ask me the bottlenecks there, then it becomes more like a very religious family, very strong fundamentals, very strong societal influences, which becomes very hard to change through those kind of community mobilization activity.
Great. And the last, I think what Dr. Shahed, you started right at the beginning to talk about is the financial inclusion angle, the village savings and loan associations, and the small amounts of money that people save. Help us understand this. And remember that everyone in our audience knows that the big impact microfinance has played in Bangladesh's development. So in that context, help us understand the role of the village loans committees.
We call it as Village Savings and Loan Association. Actually, it's a community-based savings group where women and adolescent girls are the members, particularly the Suchana program participant. And in the context of the microfinance largely spread over in Bangladesh, these small savings group with the poor population, I mean, we are not claiming that they were not exposed to this kind of things earlier. They were, but at the same time, stimulating the savings behavior is one of the social behavior change communication component that we have adopted. With the small investment savings, the investment choice made by the women in the household, that really is a trigger their women empowerment component. I mean, the way they really look around, their engagement with the multiple social actors, they are really interested to do something to support the family, to bring in some investment for their own children, either education or food for the young children or adolescent girl, whatever.
Yeah, and I'm linking this up with what Rubaiyath said earlier. That is, this is behavioral change among the women. Rubaiyath said it. Women are often the better managers of household finances. They're the saver. And as soon as a woman can get a chance to control the decisions, there is a chance of saving. The way you describe it, Dr. Shahed, and I want to understand this in more detail. There is a community angle to it. It's not only that an individual woman saves and puts away a little bit under her pillow, or in the case of a Bangladesh woman, ties it to the corner of her sari, but there is a community angle to it. And help us understand that in more detail, Rubaiyath.
So the community perspective is that the poor women, they are collectively working together for their well-being, forming a savings group, and then growing something within their household, connecting with the market actors, as Rubaiyath mentioned, which is a strong component in Suchana program. That has a collective impact on their creating their vision, creating their dream that they can really confront some of the challenges within their household or in the community. And this savings group working together in the community, there is a better opportunity to learn the different things, and that peer learning has been promoted through. I mean, how the other women are doing. I mean, they are sharing their views and experiences. At the same time, we should consider the northeast part of Bangladesh where Suchana program was implemented. There is a highly social, cultural, and religious factors that really doesn't allow women one decade back to work like that way. The progressive movement among the women that really helped them to improve their own human condition, I would say.
Just to help our audience now put it all together, the core of the project, we have behavioral change. And obviously that behavioral change is a very gender sensitive, focused on women behavioral change. It helps women take charge of family decisions. The other end of the projects are helping these poor and marginalized households to grow fish and grow poultry. That adds to the local food security of their house, their own family members, but also allows them to sell. And in order to sell and in order to grow these food items, you have market linkages at various levels created by the Suchana program. And at this point, we have the other complete the jigsaw puzzle, if you may. We have the ability of the women not only to save from their expenses, but also to come together. And because they're coming together as a community, they're able to negotiate with the fishermen. They're able to negotiate with the market actors. They're able to buy appropriate food for their children, maybe. That community coming together and behavioral change is probably, as what I've been hearing, is the core of the Suchana program. And now we will move on and understand, what the impacts of the program was in food security. And to do that, Rubaiyath, I'm going to ask you just to clear out the definition. How do you measure food security among these households?
So, to understand how Suchana is measuring the household food insecurity, it's a bit technical. For the general audience, I don't really want to go into the very deep technicalities. There's a FANTA guideline that is promoted by USAID, which was used to measure this. But generally, the households were categorized into 4 types, depending on food security. We call them food secure, we call them mild food insecure, we call them moderate food insecure, and then severe food insecure. And these are based on 9 standard questions that are used across USAID projects that look at households' access to food and different types of food that they're consuming. So based on that, it creates these scoring metrics. That's the foundation for understanding food security within Suchana. There's a very interesting result. I would cite the seminal survey for 2021. So we were comparing results between phase 3 cohort and phase 4. We compared the results between phase 3, 2019 and 2020 results and 2021. And then we compared the results of phase 4 between 2020 and 2021. Taking phase 4 as an example, food secure households in 2020 was 14%. It increased in 2021 to 18%. And then mildly food insecure, it was in 2020, 16%. It was 19% in 2021. And then moderately food insecure, it was 37%, which reduced to 27% in 2021. And then severely food insecure, it was 33%, which increased to 36%. So what was pretty interesting to observe is that there was kind of a movement upward and downward. So middle households, they were either becoming food secure or they were also becoming food insecure. And then it was also the COVID time. So what we were seeing is that the COVID impact was having a significant impact on the bottom ones, and they were getting into more food insecurity. But those which were on the middle one, they were through the program interventions, they were improving their status. But overall, the food insecurities access scale, which is called HFIS in Suchana, it remarkably improved between the phases. In 2020, for phase 4, it was 7.8, and in 2021, it was 7.071. There was remarkable increase in that, despite COVID-19.
We began the discussion about stunting, and that's why you focus on these two districts. How did the food security improvement, in spite of COVID and in spite of certain households being pushed back deeper into poverty, which is what we've seen all over, how did the stunting figures change?
Yes, I can refer the final evaluation report that has been conducted in 2023 after the implementation has been completed. With the baseline, we have seen there is 53% stunting among the children under 2. By end of the program, representation from all cohort together, we have seen it has come down to 24%. More interestingly, there are some global evidences that really talk about that average stunting reduction with a food security program or health system program like that, 2 to 3%. But in Suchana, we have seen the average stunting reduction 5.45 or 5.5, which is a bit higher over the period of 5 to 6 years. We are fully convinced with the result because the way the program has been designed, it has a unique feature of the both nutrition sensitive interventions. There is another aspect of working with the multiple sectors like the government, private sector together with a strong push to the social behavior change communication and gender component.
Yeah, I think this is very interesting. And what I think we should also understand is what Rubaiyath said about the stunting is related to the diet diversification, the type of food that the child eats, right? And I suppose it's the type of food the child eats up to 2 years age. From what I understand, it is during COVID, what must have happened is that people were fed more carbohydrates. But in a normal case, you would have more proteins and vitamins coming from the vegetables, which is related to your homestead agriculture. Is that what happened?
Yes, that's very interesting. During the COVID, the homegrown food component was alive there, right? Because that is within the household. They continued. The program has cash transfer during the COVID to the program participant. And that has really helped with these small savings, cash from the Suchana program, and also the government extended their support largely in the both urban and rural, both areas. You see the overall, the financial instability within this poor and extreme poor, even though the COVID was there, they were largely supported within the communities. And in Sylhet, we have seen the whole community support system was excellent to support their livelihood at that crisis period. So it's not only the program, but also the government and the community, they all together supported each other. And that has an impact on their dietary diversity during the pregnancy of women and the young children. Final evaluation, we took the sample from all 4 cohorts so that we can see the overall trend. And Bangladesh Demographic and Health Survey in 2022, they showed the similar downward trend of stunting in Sylhet as well. So it's not very unusual result on Suchana as such, but we have a higher paced progress than the overall country progress for sure. But there is a very similarity about the overall reduction of stunting in Bangladesh, and I would like to request that to note it that it has been done after the COVID. So the shock, both at the human shock, I mean the disease shock, and the societal mental shock and the financial shock, I mean that has been coped well in Bangladesh with a very small mortality rate as well.
To conclude this section, this is an important point, perhaps the summary point, which is that the stunting fell across Sylhet, but stunting fell more in the Suchana households. What was the differential numbers, if you may?
I mean, the differential numbers in Sylhet, it was 34%. But in Suchana, among the Suchana program participants, it is 24%. That is the 10 percentage point difference.
That perhaps explains the value of this project. If I have to boil it down to one number, perhaps that's the number, that 10% is the number. This is a 6-year project, and we had COVID in the middle, and we had the devastating floods of 2022 in this very same area, actually, so that area. When one is now designing these multi-year projects in a climate-stressed context, then one has to expect these type of events. These are not force majeure events anymore. These are, in some ways, expected events. And I'm going to ask both of you, we talked a lot about the value of the project. If you have to give advice to people who are designing multiple year projects, knowing that there will be levels of uncertainty and knowing that there will be extreme events, what are the things that they should be considering?
It's a very, very, very important point, Sanjay, that you ask, that we need to take all of these climatic shocks as given. And in a long project for 5 years or 7 years, it's almost certain that these kind of shocks will occur at least once or twice. And also, many of these projects are implemented in climate vulnerable areas because that's where the extreme poor are in most of the cases. I have seen a few important programmatic aspects that we are now recommending in the design stage already. The first and foremost one is to have a precautionary cash transfer capacity within the program. Some funds need to be there so that in such a case, a provision can be made to provide emergency cash transfer to the households which are most affected so that they can build and regroup. That's extremely important. B, savings. What we clearly saw during COVID-19, multiple assessments, is that the poor people that we work with, they don't have more than 2 weeks or 3 weeks or 4 weeks. Generally, the average is 2 weeks of liquid cash in their hand to continue to live. But beyond that, if they're not able to earn, if there's no income coming, they would erode first their savings. If they don't have savings, they will start borrow informally from relatives. And then if that is not enough, then they will start to borrow from local money lenders. Eventually, 2 months or 3 months cycle, if they're not able to back to income, they are severely burdened with informal credit. And that continues for several cycles and affects their productive capacity and investment capacity. Therefore, the BSLAs, the village savings loan schemes and associations, promotion of savings, alternative finance mechanisms, or embedding savings within the financial instruments, these are absolutely critical. But third, which I found very interesting and across different projects, is that pick an area and you would definitely want to intervene in the type of agriculture or economic activity that is of comparative advantage within that area. Interestingly, in the climate vulnerable areas, the comparative advantage is also a disadvantage in case of a shock arising. So you are promoting agriculture because most of the people are growing vegetable there, but it's also, let's say, very prone to, because the soil fertility is greater, better. But then suddenly, because you're promoting that, the houses are investing most of their resources there. Suddenly you have flood. Everything that the project has done over 2 years is washed away within a single event. It is therefore very much important to understand the climate vulnerability and then decide the type of assets that needs to be transferred or the skills or the economic engagement that needs to be promoted. I mean, increasingly, we are asking, and the projects are also adapting the projects to, let's say, invest into 2 types of income generating activities. It could be both on-firm and off-firm, a service-oriented or skills-oriented income generation, and also a kind of a resource-oriented, like land-oriented income generation. So what happens is that within the household, there are diversification of income, not as an outcome, but as an input of the project, because most projects, they take diversification of income as a kind of an outcome of the project. But if you also build in the design of the project, it starts to happen at the very onset, and which means that the households are insulated from any kind of shock because they already have a diversified income. Also, finally, once you do a kind of a mapping of the climate vulnerability, you know the kind of IGAs that are very risky, and it's better that the project does not intervene, even though there is comparative advantage for that.
Very comprehensive answer Rubaiyath. Dr. Shahed, do you want to add something?
I will look into another angle to sustain the growth, to really don't fall back into the poverty cycle again. It is very important how this poor quintile of population has been connected into the service delivery, either government or the private sector, which is very important. And to support that pathway, how to really navigate that pathway during the project period, most critical is after the project period. We are stimulating the demand for sure. We are giving them skill for sure. But sustaining the growth and really graduating out of poverty, there is a strong component how the government service delivery will be responsive to the poor population. I mean, the appearance of the poor population in the society, how they have been recognized, and how to really best avail the services, participation into the different platforms. Poverty is an issue because there is a overall tendency that Bangladesh is graduating from the least developed countries, and from 2026 onwards, there will be less funding support, and Bangladesh has to really spend on their own. If it is still there is 1/5 of the population within the poverty cycle, and we want to sustain their growth and really get them out of the poverty cycle, how to really work on those societal and government system component support that we really look forward. And the second one is I would really request to consider that the cohort approach is good, but the less number of cohort, and for the stunting reduction, we should really look forward for a longer period of program, like 5 to 6 years. 7 years to 10 years would be ideal because of we are really progressing. But the bottom part of the progress, that really takes a longer period because the whole lot of underlying and basic cause of malnutrition, which is very hard target. So it might take a longer period of time. It's not a very generalized program approach that really helps. So it depends on that to what and to whom we are working with and to what aspect the program changes has been designed in the program.
And that brings me actually to my last question. This problem is not just these two districts and the number of unions that you worked in these two districts. If you have to accelerate the stunting reduction in Bangladesh, do you have to spend this entire 40 million again, or are there ways to apply these lessons and do it more efficiently across the country?
I would like to refer one of the component that is very important, that during the program implementation, we have identified that works better. And Innovision was one of the evaluation agency in 2023. They looked into this scale-up process, or what we called as a replication process. And obviously, the next program design should not be hugely invested on this community-based intervention as such, rather than scaling up how to move on with the government system based tested interventions from the Suchana program. And to do that, most interestingly, the government investment plan. It is very important to have a dialogue that what are the key areas government want to do that. And there are some pocket areas in Bangladesh. So it's not a overall everywhere the stunting rate is very high. So we should look around the very specific interventions that is required for the specific population group. And obviously the government, they has to recognize that what kind of support they need from the developing partners. Not always this large kind of program will be required across the country. I would like to request Rubaiyath to talk about the replication because he was the evaluator, and we have seen a good result on the replication process for 1.5 years that has been done in Suchana program in 2 neighboring districts beyond the program areas.
Thank you, Dr. Shahed. So actually, the replication program of Suchana provides an important understanding of how we can probably scale these kind of projects in the future. So what Suchana did is it picked up 8 of its interventions and then replicated this through relevant government agencies. So the idea was that since we have proved the cases, the innovations that we wanted to promote, how about having the government agencies pick it up and then, let's say, demonstrate to more areas? We also saw that the government was going to have more fund from the likes of World Bank in case of, let's say, agriculture and so on and so forth. So there were clear synergies that these interventions that Suchana did could be taken up by those projects to be scaled up further. Actually, there is a very strong movement going on now to ensure that the projects do not duplicate efforts. Rather, they learn from each other in cases, if it is feasible, than just to hand over the interventions to the systems, which in case is the private sector or the public sector. I would actually advocate from the lesson that we learned from Suchana is that there can be actually a project itself that instead of directly funding to the households, can just take up the lessons from projects like Suchana and do an active facilitation across the institutional stakeholders, an active lobbying kind of a project that promotes the institutional stakeholders or stimulates them to adapt those interventions and integrate it to their core operations. There is actually a huge scope for that. We know that this often do not happen because with projects, the institutional memories are gone, even though there are papers and reports. And even with the institutions that we have, the government stakeholders that Suchana partnered with, they will probably go to another area. Now, that's where also there is a very interesting finding that we have, and I would conclude with that. What I saw very interestingly is that, let's say, a government official, he or she does an intervention together with Suchana in, say, Sylhet or Moulay and she finds it as a very interesting one. Now, she goes to the southern coastal part of Bangladesh, and she immediately asks her people that, why don't you do that? So that also happens because these government officials, they also want to be valuable in their area. They want to be seen as promoters of innovations. So much of these innovations, they continue to spill over across the country, and we do see their remnants everywhere.
So to sum up, I think the key learnings from large-scale projects like the one that you did, help the governments learn it, and then as government officials get transferred, they kind of diffuse the learnings across the country. That's kind of the message that I'm getting. And that's, of course, a very practical and useful message. With that, I've come to the end of the podcast. I'm going to quickly ask, and if people want to get in touch with you, how should they?
You can reach me for any further questions. Shahed Rahman in LinkedIn. My Gmail, shahedrahman@gmail.com.
Thank you so much, Sanjay. It was a lovely discussion, and definitely I'd love to follow up. And those who are listening, if you want to reach me out, in profile can be found as MD Rubaiyath Sarwar and rubaiyath.sarwar@innovision-bd.com. Just search Innovision, INNOVISION. Go to our website, find me there, and reach me out.
With that, thank you very much, Dr. Shahed and Dr. Rubaiyath. I think we did a reasonably good job. We can credit ourselves of having explained a fairly complicated project to a general audience.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting us.